Please welcome on stage the Secretary General of the Norwegian Atlantic Committee, Ket Hansen Bundt.
Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As Secretary General of the Norwegian Atlantic Committee, it is a great honor for me to welcome you to Oslo Security Conference 2026. This year's conference is being held under the title, The Transatlantic Partnership, the New Normal. The title reflects a profound shift in the international environment confronting the transatlantic community. For decades, Pax Americana, the US-led rule-based liberal international order shaped by the tragic experiences of two world wars, has provided the foundation for European and transatlantic security and prosperity. Today, that order is being challenged from multiple directions. On one hand, authoritarian powers such as Russia and China are actively contesting Western influence, norms, and institutions, while Russia's brutal war against Ukraine remains the most serious security challenge Europe has faced in decades. On the other hand, developments within the West are reshaping foundations of the transatlantic partnership. Donald Trump's second presidency has rattled the world order through a raw exercise of power. In order to make America great again, Trump's administration has openly flouted international law, weaponized international trade, questioned allies' ability to collective defense, and apparently embraced the idea of spheres of interest. Against this backdrop, Europe finds itself at a strategic crossroad. How should European countries and institutions respond to these critical and rapidly changing shifts in the international order? What does the new normal mean for collective defense and deterrence? And how can a strategically fragmented Europe with diverging national priorities, threat perceptions, and defense postures act with unity and purpose? What role can the European Union play? And how can small and medium-sized states like Norway safeguard their security interests in an international system increasingly shaped by rivalry amongst great powers who put might before right? Norway is one of NATO's key frontline actors in the High North, especially when it comes to monitoring Russian nuclear posture on the Kola Peninsula, aimed for US and other allies. In addition, its long coastline is a critical entry point for Allied reinforcement in the event of war and crisis. The Norwegian government is currently modernizing and strengthening the Royal Norwegian Navy. Yet, as one of Europe's small states, Norway depends on allies with shared interests who are willing and able to prioritize collective defense. Tomorrow, we will discuss the new geostrategy of the maritime domain and the future of Allied cooperation at sea. We, in the Small Atlantic Committee, are very honored to be joined by an excellent group of ministers, military leaders, and experts from across the transatlantic community. You can read more about each and one of them and this year's topic in the conference program, illustrated by the cartoonist Roar Hagen from the Norwegian newspaper VG. We will always We will also invite you to ask questions through Slido. Please scan the QR code or type the number provided on the screens. And now, it's my great pleasure and honor to leave the stage to Norway's Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, good morning. Coming in here looking at Munch, I'm thinking, imagine if this was a new rule-based order. What was the inspiration by these fabulous drawings? Well, friends, thank you to the Atlantic Committee for convening us again. Thank you for this security conference. There is a security conference in Warsaw, in Munich, and we need to connect and communicate and develop thinking in these times when things really are changing. So what is the new normal? The new normal is not a fixed square thing. It is on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is not complete unpredictability either. So we have to grasp what is the landscape around us and how are we to deal with it. But there is, as my Canadian colleague shared with us some days ago in Davos, we live through a rupture. But history is also a long row of ruptures. History's only permanent thing is change. It's just that now change comes at a pace which is challenging some fundamental values. So some components of that rupture, I think you mentioned, alluded to some of them happening. But I would start with the point that we had here on the very day, a few years ago, namely the war on Ukraine. The fact that we have a full-scale military war in Europe going on into a new year this month, with terrible consequences for the people affected, with broad consequences far beyond that region. I met the High Representative from the Republic of Korea last week, who just testified to what the war in Ukraine means for security on the Korean peninsula, in terms of what does it really mean when North Korean soldiers fight in Ukraine, and what is Russia delivering back to North Korea, just as an illustration. So this is, of course, the big challenge. Norway is neighboring Russia, so our neighbor is waging a full-scale war on another neighbor. Of course, it has profound implications for the whole outlook. Then there is the United States, as you are saying, Kate, who is weaponizing economic policy, but also the big major economic powers are in that realm. They are using value change as strong means of promoting their own interests. Be it China, doing it with large subsidies, pushing industries, not only to promote their goods, but also to penetrate markets and sometimes destabilize them. And the fact that we have experienced from a lead ally the reintroduction of tariffs, which runs counter to what we have experienced since late 40s of tariffs being built down. So one thing is building tariffs up as a means of rebalancing trade. I think most economists will question, in the big scheme, whether that really works. But what we experienced 2 weeks ago, when the US used tariffs against allies as a political means to force through the perspective on Greenland, which in itself, wanting to grab land from another land inside an alliance, illustrates how this is changing. I could go on, because there are many such examples. The world order is not breaking down completely as some kind of, back to the rebels. And there are good reasons that part of that world order should change, I would say. If you come from the south, how can you really explain that you have a UN Security Council composed of the members who came victorious out of the Second World War? If you are India, the world's most populous country, and say that that is right. Africa not represented, Latin America not represented. So we have to be also, I think, from the West with our values, focused on the fact that there needs to be change. And I share the view of my Finnish colleague, the President of Finland, who says that, in the perspective of value-based pragmatism, we in the West have to listen to the South and their legitimate concerns, be it on trade, be it on influence, be it on participation. And this is our moment where we have to be much more attentive to this. I believe. So where is Norway in this shifting environment? Of course, there is a long story to be told. But for me, and I can use this expression of being value-based pragmatists, we have to protect the values that we really cherish about democracy and freedom and human rights and rules where they apply. And they apply in many contexts. The Director General of the World Trade Organization was here in Oslo 3 weeks ago saying that 80% of world trade happens inside the rules of the WTO. And right now, my ambassador to WTO, together with his colleague from Singapore, are leading process inside WTO to adapt the rules also to reflect a world which is looking differently from what it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. We have to be part of that. But coming to Norway, there's one thing that does not change, and that is geography. And for me, geography is a good point of departure to define what are our interests. What is our vulnerability? What is our opportunity? And the fact that Norway has the world's second largest coastline matters. The fact that we have 7 times more economic zone and seabed than land matters. The fact that we provide 1/3 of Europe's gas and almost 40% of UK gas, important part of Polish independence on gas, matters. The fact that we have critical raw materials that are important to the value chains which are now have to be defended against the attacks from states matters. The fact that we are developing space activities from the northern part of Norway because we are up north matters. And I really appreciate that the High Representative Kaja Kallas, my friend, is going up to Tromsø today to take part in Arctic Frontiers. That is really valued. So how do we respond to this world changing? 2 points. First of all, we have to deepen and anchor our European participation. And friends, this is not going to be an open door to the big questions that many of you ponder on membership. It's not the issue today. The issue today is to take as a point of departure where we stand, what we have, which is really a rule-based trade in Europe. We have 80% of our trade going to Europe and the United Kingdom. And this is, of course, strategically critically important in these times where the value chains are so important to protect independence. So I want to safeguard the European Economic Area. I want to expand the perspective of that cooperation by also including these new strategic areas, which really are not primarily about rules and directives, because the directives, you know how that works in the EEA, we take the bulk of them. But it is about identifying what economic security means in our times. What does it mean and how does it affect our value chains? And how will we cooperate with Europe to be part of the European, what shall I say, defense and promotion of its independence when we are being challenged by these powers who now, without scruples, use their power to keep Europe down. Europe will always be a mix of 27, 30, 35, you choose. And that is, of course, I would say, an immense dimension of why I love Europe, because it is diversity. But it is, of course, also fragility and some certain weakness, because you stand up against these major powers who challenge. Norway has to be part of this. That is why we have concluded strategic partnership on security last year. That's why our military industry is participating in the programs being developed by Europe. Because historically we find out that our military industry has historic reasons why they are composed as they are. But they matter to Europe's security. They matter to Ukraine. They matter to the protection of Ukrainian cities as we speak. Because air defense happens to be something we are good at, and so on. So my first reply here is really that strategic anchor in Europe that we have to spend time on, and that I will really focus on in what lies ahead for us. But then secondly, if we focus on pragmatism and geography, I think there is an enduring US dimension to our security, which we have to analyze and understand. And some of you have heard me say this before, but I'll mention it again because I think it is a reality that you alluded to, Kate. When I met President Trump first time, I said this to him, looked him in his eyes and said, it's important for a Norwegian Prime Minister to see a US president in the eyes and say, 100 kilometers from my border is the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And it is not directed against me, Mr. President, but against you. And it makes a difference that we monitor those submarines. We know when they leave port. We know when they test their new weapon systems, and we share it with you, and we collaborate on monitoring that. And that is why I just have to say it rings completely false when the American president stands in Davos saying that we have given everything to NATO and NATO gives nothing in return. It is wrong. It's plain wrong. And I think a big part of the US knows that, because it matters every day, every hour. The collective security is not a charity. It is made out of self-interest. So for Norway's security, on this hard-nosed geographic reality, the following matters. We will strengthen our own defense, which means that in the coming years we will have to explain to many sectors of Norwegian society there will be less more in your area, because there has to be more on strengthening our defense, rebuilding our naval defense, and most sectors of our defense. That is a collective domestic security obligation. Secondly, we will rely on allies and alliances. An alliance. So the NATO alliance, which I think is in really good focused shape on the north. We have really modernized the regional plans. 4,000 pages that are brought to the table of leaders in Washington and The Hague. All 5 Nordic countries, members of NATO, all 5 under the command in Norfolk. We know how to do the collective collaboration on defense in the north. A month from now, we will have 25,000 troops exercising in northern Norway, northern Finland. And the 2 largest delegations there I saw was the French and the US. 4,000 to 5,000 troops each. And again, this is not charity. This is out of a mutual interest. We will preserve that. We will look after that, and we will remind our American partners about it. And if there's one trait over this last year, when the MAGA movement is moving this way, if anything, that collaboration in the north has become deeper and closer. Again, because I think deep down it really matters. But this is not enough for our security. Of course, the European dimension of this part of security is also vital. And that is also why we have a clear strategy from the Norwegian government to do our version of what it means that Europe has to step up. It is only logical. It's not because of Trump. I mean, he put pressure on it, but this has been the theme of US presidents in my lifetime, that Europe has to do more, has to pay for more. And we have to do more wisely. We should not do more one after one after one, but we have to do it in a coordinated way with capabilities, so we don't all buy the same things. You know, Norway, Sweden, and Finland have 250 fighter jets. And they will now exercise and work in a much more integrated way, and they are a formidable force of deterrence. So we will do our part in spending on defense. We will aim to spend wisely at defense, so it really fits into these regional plans. But then we will do more. We will deepen strategically our cooperation with the lead European partners, with the United Kingdom. Don't forget, friends, EU is critical for our security. But EU member states represent 20% of NATO's military capacity. 80% is non-EU. US, Canada, Turkey, UK, Norway. So when we buy our frigates from the United Kingdom, it is more than the purchase. This is about integration of our naval defense. In crisis, basically, these will be very, very closely working together. So when we buy our submarines from Germany and our tanks from Germany, it is also a deep industrial integration in security terms with Germany. And when we conclude agreements on security and partnership with France and Poland, we have other 2 major Northern European partners, partly in their outlook, in our pattern of agreements. And when we deepen, as ex-Prime Minister Kallas and now the High Representative knows, the joint expeditionary force between the Nordic, Baltic, UK, and Netherlands, and we exercise together, it is because we are developing a Northern European dimension of security. And this has to be built further. For me, this is what I would call kind of Euro-NATO. It has to happen inside NATO, in my view, because NATO has the command structure, has the experience, has the appearance of the Americans. But we have to take more responsibility, both in the way we invest, in the way we plan, in the way we purchase, but also in the way we structure. So this is, for me, a take on what may be kind of the new normal in the world that is changing as it is. And I think, we have values to defend, which I think there are millions out there in the world aspiring to those values. We should not be shy about them. And with that point of departure, I think we should also have confidence and also some degree of optimism that those values can prevail. I'm 20 seconds over time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for your timely address of these challenges for Europe and transatlantic security. It's really great and a privilege to introduce our next panelist, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Please give her an applause. I think I will start with you, and I have my phone on so people can send in questions if they want. Kallas, the Prime Minister talked about we are in the midst of a transition in the international system. Mark Carney called it a rupture. How do you see it? Transition or a rupture?
Yeah. Well, I think I totally share what Jonas was saying, that every international big crisis is also, basis for developing international system further. If you think we had the League of Nations, then we had the Second World War, so it didn't work really. So United Nations was created. But now, as we heard, United Nations definitely is not delivering the way it should. I mean, if I go around the world, then I see that really there are a lot of countries that want the rules-based order because the majority of countries in the world are medium-sized or small countries. So for them, international order is really the thing that protects them. But if it doesn't work, then, it doesn't give you the coverage. There's an argument that actually, the international rules-based order has been an illusion. It has been always law of the jungle, wherever who has the might takes what they want. But even in jungle, you have animals cooperating.
Yep.
And I really see that we are in this situation where we have to really develop this international law further with those countries who want the rules-based order. And what is really lacking, because all of us want that there wouldn't be any wars. So what is lacking is the UN Charter is very good. I mean, the principles there are very good, but it lacks the accountability part, really. What happens if you breach those rules? So we have the Security Council at the moment, but we have seen if a Security Council member attacks another country totally in breach of the UN Charter, then you can't really do anything. And I echo what you said. Also, it doesn't reflect the current world. So there's a lot of what we can build on, and I think we also need to use this opportunity to build further, because, like I say, the majority of countries in the world actually want the rules-based order.
Støre, what we are witnessing, is it in a way driven by political personalities, or is it deeper structural changes in the overall global governance or method of governance?
Well, I think this is a typical question you get at university when you study international relations. Yeah. I remember when I studied this was a classical issue, how much does personal relations matter?
Yeah.
And then you may say, again, you know, that interests rule, you know, really. But personalities also matter in the terms that, on the one hand, they may drive change, they become something new, and they become also the illustration of change. And I think that what we see now, for example, in the personalities of the president of Russia, is of course encapsulating much more than his own personality, but it's a part of the way an authoritarian rule, which has deep roots, is developing further. But it is also, I think, to a large degree driven by that personality's preferences and also endurance, because authoritarian leaders tend to endure, and then they put their print on the time to a large extent. So one of the characterizations of this world where you have large powers who put aside rules and promote further, it is the leader who is really, you know, the embodiment of this change. Same with Donald Trump. I mean, I think the speech we heard in Davos, if you read it and if you listen to it, is also so much him. And the MAGA movement, and you have to kind of extract how much of this is really US and how much is his exposure. And same with the president of China, you know, and other personalities. But deep down, I think it comes from interests and from the power they possess.
Yeah. Historical change is rooted in some more basic trends.
But yes, I just wanted to add that actually, if we look at the transatlantic policy, or we look at what the U.S. administration has, you know, the decisions that they have taken. I mean, it didn't really start with President Trump. I think, you know, there's a lot of convergence with the policies of different administrations, really. So I don't think it's because it might be also easy to think that, you know, one personality comes, there are elections, then another one. But I think it's a long-term policy that we really need to look at. And one thing that I wanted to also say is that you said that. Part of the big part of U.S. knows that we are Europe is their allies, and I saw a poll that was done in October, and that was interesting because really over 40% of Americans consider Europe their biggest ally that they can trust. Now the question to the Europeans, and that was in October. That was 14%. I think since October we have seen a lot happening, so I think it might be even lower now on the European side when looking at America. And this is a problem, definitely.
Exactly. Before I'm leaving the personalities, it's a saying that all politics is local. These days, it seems like all international politics are personal. You're SMSing, you're using social media platforms to intervene with other state leaders. Is it so? And could you reflect a little bit on what kind of new dynamism this creates in international diplomacy, that you are on the phone with state leaders almost daily? I think it's a new thing in international politics. The institutions is in a way as big platform being, I don't know, ignored.
Well, I guess that all the officials around us are actually quite concerned that we are on the phone all the time or texting between each other, and they know nothing about this. So, but at the same time, I think, you know, it really brings us closer that we are able to do this. And I think the times, like are really, really rapid. Like everything is happening so quickly that we also need to have the tools to, contact really quickly with the ones that we are like-minded, and of course also reach out to those who think differently.
But think about it. I mean, there are many I see here in this whole experts of history. But I mean, not too long ago, the main communication was a visit.
Yeah.
So when there was a visit by a state leader or a foreign minister, that's when you had the communication. So institutions are just 10,000 times too slow. You can't do it that way. And I think it's just a matter of logic that we use every opportunity to communicate, and things happen so fast. So take, for example, when you had this Board of Peace coming up, that Saturday morning, and Espen and I, the foreign minister, we were on the phone before 8 o'clock to say we have to, ask our legal experts to look at this. Before 10 o'clock, there were, I think, about 10 colleagues who had, connected to say, let's look at this together. And during the day, we had an analysis. You cannot wait until next week and, convene a meeting. It's just too late. And of course, for Kaja to run 27, I think she's my big hero of being courageous, and she has to reach unanimity in addition.
Yeah. And if you go 100 years back, I think all the state leaders were around Queen Victoria's dinner table.
Yeah.
So, history is in a way repeating itself. Carlos, as the High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, you have, as far as I know, 3 mandates: defending Europe, securing the neighborhood, and building partnerships. Can you specify a bit more on what that means for European security and a partner like Norway?
Yes. Well, I think in the world that we are right now, we really need to build up our own defenses, and that's why part of my work is really to try to bring member states together to do things on defense together, also with our partners, because so far, on the European level, we have the ministers of justice meeting all the time, and they already think European, whereas the defense ministers have always been like, national budgets, national decision making. And of course, it's a competence of the member states. Nobody's taking that away, but thinking that member states are too small to do it alone. If we do it together, we can actually cover a bigger area. Take air defense, for example. Doing it together, it's expensive. So we have 9 capability areas that we are developing really in collaboration with NATO. So 23 members of EU are also members of NATO. You have the capability targets there, but how can we actually, European defense industry contribute and work together in order to reach that? Now, when it comes to building partnerships, then it is really what I said before. Whether you go to Asia or Latin America, then really there's a lot of looking at our way in Europe that, if you do this, we come with you, or like, we want to be behind you because we want to build partnerships with you. Because, being predictable, that has been maybe, because we are a bit, like President Macron said, too slow, for sure. But it has become our strength in terms of being predictable and stable ally. So really, partners are looking at us. And of course, we also want to diversify our portfolios. We have learned the hard way that, having dependencies, whether it's on energy, whether it's on security, having dependencies is making you vulnerable. And if you're vulnerable, you're weak. And that's why really building partnerships is key. And of course, Norway, we sort of consider also a part of Europe, and that's why very close ally. We have a security and defense partnership, and in terms of economic security as well, the cooperation that we can do in this front. And when it comes to maritime security, I think also developing international international rules further, that they would, be applicable today, because we didn't have critical undersea infrastructure before, we didn't have weaponization of trade routes before, so I think there's a lot where we can cooperate and not putting all the eggs in one basket anymore.
I have another question to you directly here from Karsten Friis. Kubelius has called for a new European Security Council comprised of the major powers of Europe to provide security leadership. Your thoughts on that?
Well, we already have a defense council. I'm not really, maybe I come from a private practice, and having been prime minister, I'm really, thinking in terms of implementation. It's not about, the meetings. We have the defense council, which is the meeting of defense ministers. We have the European Council, that is meeting of leaders. So we have a lot of meetings. Now, the question is how to really make these things actually work in practice. I mean, whether it's capability coalitions that we have built or other parts. So I don't think we need more institutions. We just need to implement the plans we already have.
And you also said last week, I think, that a EU force separate from NATO was inconceivable.
No, I said that was Secretary General of NATO who said that. But what I said is that those who say that we need a European army. Maybe, those people haven't really thought this through practically, because having been a prime minister, you know that you have one army, you have one defense budget. So if you are already part of NATO, and then you can't, create a separate army, besides the army that you already have. Because in terms of crisis, what is the most important is the chain of command. Who gives orders to whom? And if you have, like, the European army, and then you have the NATO, then, the ball just falls between the chairs, and this is extremely, extremely dangerous. That's why I say we have to strengthen European defense, which is also part of NATO. It is really complementary to NATO. Let's not throw NATO out of the window.
Sture, you said that, you talked about the Euro NATO. That we have to strengthen the European pillar or the European group in NATO who has to deliver more. Is this the answer on a European?
I think it's exactly what Kaja is saying, and
exactly.
Speaking from her experience. And I think actually those proposals that the European Union should be about defense and command structure is doing a lot of damage to the debate, because it's not the road we should travel.
Yeah.
Take that away. And I think, security in Europe now, if you think about it very pragmatically, with the UK outside the EU, but still a major military power with nuclear weapons and, its capabilities. Norway, not to be shy, lying there in the north looking after security. We have to break through this, and get that into pragmatism. NATO is there with a decision-making process among allies, which is in itself complex, but it is trained to work. And as I said in my intervention, I think, we will see a deepening of perspectives and purpose of the northern European countries, which is natural. And I can understand that, for Giorgia Meloni in Italy, with her outlook, she has a different regional outlook around her. And she will have to deepen that also with countries close to her because of geography. And we will have to do something close to geography up north. So, Espen and I, when we were in government 20 years ago, we took this initiative of saying, let's bring NATO home. Because at that time, the kind of impression was that NATO commanders knew more about the mountains in Afghanistan than about the fjords of Norway. Yeah. And basically, I think that has, with history's many turns and tragedies, it has in a way succeeded that there is a focus now on defending the core territories. So I think, we have a good point of departure to this. I'll just come back to my point. When we now invest in defense to 3.5% and 5%, let us do that wisely. Because if we do it side by side, it will be waste. If we do it coordinated, it can be a formidable force of deterrence.
Exactly.
NATO threatens nobody, but nobody should be under the impression that they can threaten us.
And NATO has one very valuable thing, and that's standardization of the forces. And I think that's very important also for the Europeans, because to have 178 different weapon systems is not going to bring us further.
But there is also one request that we have as the European Union to NATO to share those standards, like and information, because we can't help to our member states to develop those capabilities or do them together if we don't know everything that we need to know in this regard. And there, I think the 23 members that are members of both organizations have a particular responsibility.
Yeah. And how do you see what kind of measures can be taken to improve the relationship between the EU and NATO in the years to come? Because I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, no, the relationship between EU and NATO is very good. I mean, we are in constant contact, and but the thing is that what is the NATO, all the members need to agree, sharing, some of the information that is, problematic for some members. If we think about, Turkey and we think about some European Union members. So we need to overcome those obstacles, because we really need to have sharing of these things so we can help both organizations, really.
But think about it, what has changed. I mean, a few years ago, NATO and the EU could not talk together.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
it was blocked. And I think it was during Jens Stoltenberg's term that, the Secretary General of NATO could meet with the President of the European Council, and you can go to each other's meetings. So there's a major progress done. So here I think, we have to be pragmatic. I think NATO really depends on European defense industry, coordinating, integrating, getting standards right, put away red tape, develop further. And let us now, again, not rule out the strong collaboration still with the United States. And I think, the thinking that, they will leave all of this and not see it as their interest will not be the case.
Yeah.
And, we come from the NATO summit last year in The Hague, I think with a significant unity of purpose that it is in our interest to protect.
I read your defense minister in Aftenposten a couple of days ago. He said that we have been free riders on American security for many years. And I think, but what can we do with an ally like Donald Trump, who questions NATO's willingness to defend the US, but he sends 4,000 American troops to Norway this winter to exercise on Arctic warfare, and in fact of defending us in our geography? How should Norway respond to the different signals coming from DC these days?
Well, we sent per capita probably among the most to defend the US after 9/11. So, I mean, that debate we can take on different horizons. And I think, we will welcome those troops from the US at the cold response. It is very important for Norway's defense, but also Sweden and Finland and down to the Baltic Sea and our neighbors. But again, we don't go do collective security out of charity. There is a mutual thing here.
Yeah.
But again, we have to, as politicians, to read what we see. I think what we hear from Trump when he does those kind of messages is the MAGA movement prime headlines. And that speech in Davos, I think, was a testimony to that. But we hear also the US speak with other messages of a different kind of nature. But obviously, I told Kaja this morning, as a former chief of staff of the World Health Organization 25 years ago, when I saw that picture last week of the US flag being taken down in front of the WHO building in Geneva, I thought, this is also very bad.
Yeah.
For security, because there's going to be a new pandemic, there's going to be new global health threats, and the idea that the US will defend the US mainland against health threats by pulling out of that cooperation is very, very serious. So, in understanding modern security, we have to get weapons right, and industries right, and command structures right, but these elements will still be absolutely fundamental, how we do cooperation on that, on trade, on health, and on new technologies.
You are going from here to Tromsø, and the Arctic is moving higher up on the global security agenda colors. How does the EU view its role in an increasingly strategic and contested Arctic region?
We have an Arctic strategy that is a bit outdated. So we have agreed to do a new Arctic strategy, because it's not only about environmental issues, but it's all about also about security and what comes with it. So we are working on this. We want to work together with our Nordic partners when it comes to the security of the Arctic, and also defending it in terms of economic security perspective. So definitely I can't say what's going to be in that strategy, because it's still a work in progress, but we are in contact with our partners like Norway to have the input so that we have it right.
Sture?
Yeah, and we look forward to that. And I can remember when we defined the High North as our priority in foreign policy in 2005, and we developed the Arctic policy. We had close cooperation with the EU of their first Arctic strategy in 2008, I believe. At that time, the critical element to really anchor was that the law of the sea applies in the Arctic.
Yeah.
Because many people said the Arctic is terra nullus. You know, if you get up there, there are no rules. So we had, and I reminded my Danish friends and also American friends that a declaration signed in 2008 at Greenland, at Ilulissat, stating that basically the rule of the law of the sea applies. And although the US has not ratified the Convention of the Law of the Sea, since Ronald Reagan, they have respected it, said that it applies. So that is one important area. So there are economic zones, there is rights and obligation of coastal states. Then we have developed cooperation in the Arctic with Russia for many years. Now Russia is out of the Arctic Council, and that is taking cooperation down. But the other Arctic states have to continue to work on environment, on transport, on energy, on minerals. And just one point on security in the Arctic. I think that now we have focus on Greenland. And this completely false assertion that there are Russian and Chinese ships circulating Greenland all the time. It seems not to be the case. But we should, based on the principle that NATO should be relevant for all parts of NATO. And obviously Greenland is and will become an important part, strategically important. But we must not make the big mistake to say that the biggest challenge for security in the Arctic now is in and around Greenland. It still is the concentration of nuclear arms close to us with the link down to the Baltic Sea. That is where the major challenge lies. So we will take active part in this, and as we've always said with the European Union, sharing information and see how we can contribute. And one thing, I said to Kaja that there is this idea in the EU that there will be moratorium against importing energy from the Arctic. Well, I think that should be reconsidered, because all of the LNG the EU is receiving from Norway comes from the Arctic. Yeah. If that were to stop tomorrow because of a moratorium, it could go somewhere else. I think that would be a shame.
One question over Slido here from one anonymous questioner to the Prime Minister. Regarding the New World Order and the defense of Europe, do you consider the need to establish a Nordic nuclear deterrence?
No, there I think again, if you think about the ambition of the Nordics and Scandinavians after 1945, they had ambitions in defense, in currency, in market, and on all of those areas it proved that it had to be either European or Euro-Atlantic. So for security it had to be Euro-Atlantic with NATO. With markets it ended up to be a European market, either the internal market membership or EEA. On currency, for some countries it is the euro, for the bulk of countries. And the only area where we really moved ahead as Nordics was on passport-free travel. Very important in the 1950s already. But I think there will be a discussion among Europeans, and should be a discussion about the nuclear deterrent. but it has to be European and inside the logic of NATO. But obviously, we have a NATO strategy which is very clear, that the nuclear is a prime deterrent, but it is not Nordic. It is NATO and European.
If I may add to this, this is also the sign of our times, that that we have this thinking when it comes to a lot of countries in the world, that whether we need a nuclear weapon, which is very dangerous development, because so far, it was the non-proliferation, and it was in everybody's interest, really. But now, and it started with Russia's war, because then a lot of countries saw that actually threatening with the nuclear weapon works. You get to walk away with what you want.
Yeah.
And okay, so there's a thinking, all those countries who have appetite for their neighbors' territories is like, okay, we should have a nuclear weapon, because then we get what we want. And all those countries who are afraid of their neighbors think that, this is the only thing that works, so we should have a nuclear weapon. And I think, in terms of the world order, this is a very dangerous development.
Exactly. Time is running. I would like to end with the main security threat in Europe. That's Ukraine. It's Russia's war against Ukraine. It's going into its 5th year this February. What is the path forward for the European Union to support Ukraine, and what role can Europe play in the future of some kind of peace process? I think that so far we have been very reactive to what's coming out of Washington. Should we be more in taking an initiative? It's a terrible war. We have to end it.
Well, we had this discussion in the morning as well. Now, the problem is that what we see right now is that there has been a lot of push on Ukrainians to make very difficult concessions, which they are willing to do because they really want this war to stop. Now, this is blurring the picture from where the problem actually lies. If you think, last 100 years, Russia has attacked at least 19 countries, some as many as 3 or 4 times. None of those countries has ever attacked Russia. So the question is how we make sure that this war does not continue or go anywhere else. So we need to see concessions on the Russian side, on limitations on their military budget, on their army, all these things, or nuclear weapons. Yep. So that to take this threat really away, plus the accountability for the crimes that they have committed. Now, there's no talk about this. Now, of course, the Russians see that why should they talk to the Europeans if, talking to the Americans is delivering them the maximalist demands that they haven't even conquered militarily. So if we say that, you should talk to us because we want you to make concessions, I mean, why should they? So I think, in the peace process, we have a very clear role, because what we have seen is that, you can agree whatever, but if Europe is not agreeing to this, you need Europe on board, because then it also works. We need to think about the life after. As well, we were discussing before, and really to what is our approach right now is that we need to put more pressure on Russia so that they would go from pretending to negotiate to actually negotiate. And that's what we are doing, because otherwise, we don't have actually a choice, and supporting Ukraine, of course.
Stöder. Last word on
Well, I mean, because geography matters, the day this war is over and it has to end, I think the Ukrainians will keep fighting, because they are not likely to lie down, and we should support them with military means. We should support them with energy. We should support them diplomatically. But the day it ends, it will still be Europe.
Yeah.
Don't forget. And that is why, how we build the economic development plan. And think about, the generations of Ukrainians who will be affected by this. There are 4.5 million refugees. 100,000 of them in Norway. So, and all of these are European tasks, and it will be big time issues for us to solve. So we have to keep our focus.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister and High Representative Kallas, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. And while they are leaving, it is my great pleasure to invite to the stage Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Radmila Shekerinska. Please, Shekerinska. The floor is yours. Do you want to stand there? Okay. I will join you in a minute.
Good morning, and it's great to follow this very interesting, very honest, and very open discussion. And it gives me really a great pleasure to be, for the first time, within this building. I remember visiting Norway many years ago. I was still a student, if I remember correctly, and as part of a Norwegian support program towards Central and Eastern Europe, I was invited here as one of the young leaders from the then Social Democratic Youth of Macedonia to join you for a program at Utøya. And it was a transformative experience because going through the many different elements of the Norwegian model, I have been confirmed in my views that politics can be a noble profession, that we can achieve more if we show more solidarity, if we search for the right answers to our joint problems. And I always say that it is because of Norway that I actually became involved very actively and chose politics as my profession. So in my both good and bad days in politics, and my friends here know that there are plenty of both, I do thank and blame Norway for it very often. But let me say, I was invited here to talk about one of the most important challenges and questions of today, and this is how do we see transatlantic relations in the future. And let me share, we have had the beginning of this discussion initially by the Prime Minister and the High Representative, but let me kick up the discussion with a few observations from where I stand in NATO. First, transatlantic relations were, are, and will be a result of hard work, but also shared interests and political will. And this has always been the case. Sometimes it's more visible, sometimes it's less visible, but you need all these elements to make these transatlantic relations work and be productive for all. For over 3/4 of a century, NATO has been able to provide its key goal, and this is to give security for 1 billion people across the alliance. And what is more important, we do agree on what is needed in order to deliver this shared goal. More defense investments, more defense production at a speedier scale, and also more support to Ukraine. And thank you for also raising this issue. It is clear that in this moment we do have the political will to make these three things happen. And I will tell you, last year, more or less this time of the year, I was in Sweden for their security conference. I was also in Vilnius for their snow conference. And if someone would have asked any of us, not just me, any of us there, would it be feasible for all 32 allies to agree not on a 2.5, not on a 3 or 3, on 5% of GDP defense investment pledge, most of us would have said no. Because let us not forget, even in 2025, it was still a challenge to have all allies at 2%, on which we have agreed more than 10 years ago. So still, We did. At the Hague Summit, we have managed to convince all and to have everyone on board to invest up to 5% of GDP until 2035, and this is our direction of travel. If you would have asked us, and even these people who are very active in defense production, will we be able to turn the tide when it comes to scaling up production, speeding up defense production? Many people probably would have been also less optimistic. But it is clear that the demand signal that was sent by the political leaders in The Hague, the fact that we have started interacting with defense industry in a regular, predictable, and very open discussion, did change the course. And what we have seen is that the defense industry across the alliance is already picking up pace, producing more firepower. We see this especially when it comes to ammunition, which was a source of great disappointment, that the fact that we couldn't produce not only as much as Russia, but actually 4 times less than Russia. This has changed dramatically in the course of 1 year, and we see this together with adopting latest technologies as a key element to change the developments, to change the curve. So don't get me wrong, we are not naive and we shouldn't be. We still have a lot to do. A commitment to spend and invest more is still commitment. Some of the countries are paving the way towards 5% at a much more ambitious timescale, but some are still taking their time. But it is clear that both leaders and defense industry know that we cannot stick to the old normal. We have to invest in our security because our security is challenged. And within our deterrence, we need to incorporate the defense industry, because if there is one very clear lesson from Ukraine, is that your pace of production and your industry and your innovation are as important as your political will to fight, as your military might and your command and control. We have also been clear about stepping up support to Ukraine. And I'm saying this here in Norway, and I want to stress that it is allies like Norway that have made this possible. By being active on all fronts, not just supporting Ukraine politically, but also supporting humanitarian needs, supporting issues such as energy security, which has become the big crisis now in Ukraine, but also being very clear in supporting them with military means. And I know that in the course of the last now 5th year, we have seen ups and downs, but Norway's commitment was really exemplary. And thank you for doing this, and thank you for pushing also other allies into doing the same. So we have come in a situation in which we see what is happening in Ukraine as also lessons learned of what are the wars of tomorrow. And by having your defense industry supporting them, by having all of us supporting their military capabilities, but also their training, their intelligence, we are actually we are also supporting our own deterrence and defense. And I don't think that we can repeat this message enough. This leads me to my second point, and this is that strong Atlantic relations demand that we sometimes have to work through our differences. And this is where the hard work comes. And I think your Prime Minister was very clear in saying that this is an approach that works. We are democracies. We have debates within our societies. We should not take them for granted. We also have dialogue with different allies. And sometimes, like in history, we have different points of view. And the big advantage is that the DNA of this alliance is about discussing and finding a way out and coming up with a solution that matches our shared interests for security. So we have, as part of this also discussion lately, we have come up with a U-turn when it comes to Arctic security. And several things were already mentioned, but I will just add that it was through the intelligence and the information from allies such as Norway, we have seen that across the Arctic we do see more interest and more presence by Russia. They have created their Arctic command. They have reopened some old military sites. They are creating new ones, basically deep water ports, but also airfields. They're testing their novel weapons in the Arctic. And this calls for our attention. And it became clear that it was not only Norway, and it was not just our Arctic allies that have the interest to preserve security, stability, and cooperation in the High North. It is in the interest of all NATO allies. And this is why we have agreed that we will do more, without focusing on just one part of the Arctic, but really looking at the Arctic as an area where we have to be strategically present and we have to protect our interests. And we have seen that allies are procuring more capabilities that are appropriate for our presence in the High North. Our troops are exercising in Arctic condition, and this is where Norway comes as a leader. So last October, we opened a new center in Bod that focuses on these issues, and with the exercise this March, this will be a very clear signal, not only of your contributions, of the importance of the Arctic, but as was mentioned, the importance of transatlantic unity. So transatlantic relations may be tested, and they are always tested, but we always come up with the alliance being stronger. Which brings me to my third and final observation, that the bond between Europe and North America remains the only really winning way in developing our security in a more dangerous and less predictable world. US security, US troops, US military might is indispensable for European security, but it goes both ways. It is also what Europeans, what we bring to the table, remains relevant from the Arctic to the Atlantic and towards US and Canada's security. So in this way, this is the bond that has kept our two continents together, and this is a bond that has made all of us more secure. For Europe and Canada to step up on defense investment is not a question of choice. It is a question of necessity, and this has been the case for quite some time. But it is true that the time when we could, some would say conveniently, give up on focusing on security and allow the US to deal with it is over. And this is a much more just and more stable arrangement in which not only US, but also Canada and European allies contribute in a meaningful way to our Euro-Atlantic security. This is why when we did our last polls, 81% of allied citizens, on average, throughout the alliance, consider the transatlantic bond as crucial for our shared security. And we have these expectations to take into account, but we also have some lessons, good and bad, from the more than 75 years of history. And this is why we do believe that, especially in challenging times, we will be able to deliver more security, but also more cooperation in a very, very hostile and unpredictable world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for pointing out the importance of the transatlantic bond and how we can strengthen in these turbulent times. It is a result of hard work, shared interest, and political will, as you said in your remarks. However, we have to reflect on the last week's remarks from Donald Trump and the tough diplomacy around Greenland, and his rather harsh rhetoric to European allies and Canada of being weak. How much has this harmed the trust among the allies? Could you tell a little bit from the headquarters? And how can we heal it?
Well, I remember reading, your Prime Minister mentioned, the days of university work and how I remember some of my university lessons that spoke about what is the basis and the strength of alliances in history and in the world. Is it a threat or is it trust?
Yeah.
And in my view, it has to be both. Yeah. We do share the common goal of providing security, and we have to also work on this with the appropriate level of trust. And I have to say that trust goes both ways.
Yeah.
But it is true that for many years, actually decades, as Europeans, we got used to US carrying most of the burden in an unacceptable way, maybe acceptable after the Second World War, but practically this has been the source of frustration for so many years and for so many administrations. We also have to be open about this fact. I remember the first time I joined a ministerial meeting, it was Ministers of Defense when my country, North Macedonia, was still not part of the alliance, but we did support NATO in Afghanistan and in Iraq previously. So we were there around the table discussing Afghanistan, but at every meeting, the Secretary of Defense from the US would start by calling European allies and Canada to invest more in their defense. Yeah. And some European colleagues saying, yes, we agree, but we cannot do it now. And this has been going on for too long. I remember some people were quoting JFK in '63, talking more or less about the same frustration from the other side of the Atlantic, that countries which are moving forward in terms of economy, in terms of capacities, are not willing to in a way, finance appropriately and invest in their security. So we have approached this problem in The Hague in a very pragmatic way. How can we do better? How can we invest in the trust by saying that European allies and Canada are doing more? And there is a clear sense, and I would say even understanding and consensus among all allies, that we will continue to develop, you called it previously European pillar of NATO, European defense within NATO, and this balance sharing, actually balance shifting, will strengthen the alliance. It will not weaken it. And of course, allowing US to be present in other theaters, but also saying that US nuclear deterrent remains also very important for the alliance, apropos the discussions that we have had previously.
Yeah, I think it was Donald Tusk who said it's not fair that 500 million Europeans are asking 300 million Americans to defend them against 140 million Russians.
You're absolutely
right. And I think it's time to step up.
Yeah. And I think he added also from an economy the size of Italy. So both in terms of numbers, in terms of economy, might, innovation, power of industry, it's we can do better, and we can deter by investing even more in our security.
It's talking about in NATO now burden shifting instead of burden sharing. What's the difference between the two terms? Does burden shifting somehow indicate that some downsizing or even withdrawal of American troops in Europe? Or burden shifting has been on the table for many decades.
Well, this is it. When you don't deal with burden shifting, then you have to be even more ambitious afterwards. It is clear that European allies and Canada, and European allies especially on the continent, are prepared to take the lead when it comes to conventional deterrence. And this means more prominent role, bigger numbers, but also capabilities. And this is where our relationship with defense industry become crucial. I started this morning in Oslo with a conversation with representatives from the Norwegian defense industry. Really remarkable, not just the primes, but really small and medium companies who bring something to the table. And they said that they have seen the demand signal growing stronger after The Hague, but they also need some additional predictability. Why is this that defense industry still with certain question marks? That's because they're afraid. Is our commitment real, and will it stay? Because we have had commitments in the past, and unfortunately, too many allies we were dragging our feet. So I think what was very important in The Hague was to send this message, and then what is important is that now we focus on implementation. Because it's not as if the 5% is something that we have on the table. The 5% is goal. Some countries are more ambitious. Some countries have already shown, that they can contribute 5% either this year, next year, or until 2030. And I have to also say Norway was a very strong ally in terms of having the 2% even before many of the others. But we have to convince also defense industry and our adversaries that our commitment is not going to disappear especially the moment after the war in Ukraine ends. Because it is a clear understanding by all our intelligence services, by all our experts, that when the war stops in Ukraine, the threat of Russia will not disappear. On the contrary, they have shown that aggression will be and will continue to be their foreign policy towards practically all their neighbors. And we have seen this when we analyze Russian economy, when we see how they're churning up military equipment. So this is why our commitment cannot be a one-time decision. It has to be a sustained effort that will strengthen us.
Totally agree. You mentioned the need for NATO to step up in the Arctic. To a Norwegian and a Finn, the Arctic is part of our DNA, Prime Minister Støre and President Alexander Stubb wrote in Financial Times, I think it was last week. And in the last year, the NATO profile in the Arctic is already enhanced due to updated regional plans and command structure, as well as Finnish and Swedish NATO membership. So what more could you do, or should NATO do, without diverting critical resources from other key priorities, as Ukraine?
Well, you're absolutely right that for you, Arctic was never too high or too north.
We live there.
And we have always counted on Norway to be our eyes and ears when it comes to this region. But it is true that there was hesitation, on behalf of even Arctic nations, on how should NATO be involved. It was predominantly seen more as a national exercise, national responsibility. This thinking has changed. And what we have seen because of Russian presence, because of Russian activities there, is that we have to be more united and we have to have a more coordinated response there. 7 out of 8 Arctic nations in the world are NATO allies.
Exactly.
So it is our front yard in a way. And what is necessary, of course, is for us to have not only more knowledge, more situational awareness, but also more presence and more capabilities. And the whole concept of the Hague commitment is not to move our capabilities around, but to increase and strengthen our capabilities. What was different was that even in our defense planning cycle, we had to adjust to looking at Arctic and Arctic capabilities as part of our planning. And the fact that now these countries are part of Norfolk Joint Command responsibility will be extremely helpful. But the idea is not to weaken our defenses elsewhere, but actually to bring more capabilities to the table, and it's definitely capabilities that you don't need elsewhere. I mean, these are all more specialized capabilities, more specialized military exercises, and this is why actually our Arctic allies are a huge resource. Living and fighting in this environment is a completely different ballgame, I was told. And after walking in Oslo, which is probably a very, very mild version of this, I can understand.
Yes, almost no snow these days.
Yes.
But we have to end by talking a little bit about the agenda for the upcoming Ankara summit of NATO this summer. The allies will meet again, and will it be assessment of how far you have, we have reached the commitments from Hague? What other topics will be on the agenda, do you know?
The Secretary General, when we were preparing for The Hague, he was very clear, not only in the discussions about the summit, but even discussions referring to NATO internal reorganizations. His goal, and maybe this is his Prime Minister's experience speaking, is we have to focus on our core business.
Yeah.
And it was an additional argument for him also to advocate stronger cooperation with the EU. Why? Because there are areas in which EU is actually better positioned with more know-how, and we shouldn't just repeat what they know better. So it should really be a cooperation. But NATO has to focus on what we know best, and probably we are the only ones with the DNA and the history and the experiences, good and bad, of actually command and control, defining military capability, and conducting operations. So he said even then, we will not pick our 3 priorities for The Hague and then think about different priorities next year. No, it's all about implementation and delivering on these commitments, because the 5% pledge is only as good as our budget decisions are every year. If we don't follow up, they will actually become a vulnerability. On defense production, we will continue also the focus in Ankara, and we will have another industry day focusing very much on how can we support industry and how can we be better with using additional funds, but hopefully without avoiding additional costs. Because there were several ministers, I remember in the preparation to the summit, who said, if we increase spending, we will just end up with more inflation. So this is why our message to allies was, let's do more joint procurements, let's try to cooperate more, and let's insist on more innovative solutions in looking for the right capability targets. So this will also be high on the agenda. And the third element, this is what we do every day. I mean, we push allies to do even more on supporting Ukraine. And we just had 2 very important NAC sessions focusing on how can we support Ukraine so that they can really negotiate with more assurances and more strength on their side. And trust me, especially on issues such as air defenses, the situation is and was dire.
Yeah.
And this is something where I cannot avoid mentioning again Norway. The fact that you were able to use also your defense industry to support, but you were also, I think, a leader in terms of supporting financial package for the so-called prioritized Ukraine requirement list, which basically delivered ammunition and air defenses to Ukraine as we speak. So very quickly, this saved lives. It saved lives on the battlefield, it saved lives in Ukrainian cities, and we know that the focus now is on the peace process, but we also know that we have to continue with this support, because as you could see even today, the fighting has not stopped, and the attacks, especially on civilian and energy infrastructure, have only picked up. So these 3 things will be our focus as we head towards Ankara as well.
Thank you so much for a very inspiring and interesting conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
And good luck with your important task to keep us safe.